Welcome to another episode of the Almost Awakened podcast. I'm Bill Reel,
And I am Teresa Hobbs.
and we're grateful for the chance to be with you today. Today, we're going to talk about boundaries and specifically with high demand systems, but I think we'll mix in some conversation around personal relationships and how we do boundaries there as well. I'm going to start off by putting up on the screen our slideshow for the day, little image there with boundaries and offense. There are boundaries all throughout our society, Teresa, and there are rules, and rules are important. They help keep us safe. Do you have any immediate thoughts on boundaries before I jump into maybe a working definition for today's conversation?
I'll just say that I think boundaries are one of the most fundamental aspects that people need to understand in order to further their own healing. I think that this shows up in so many areas that people might not even think about. And it goes hand in hand with codependency and a lot of high demand controlling systems tend to create a lot of codependency within the population, and so this is really, really common in those systems, and also you'll see this playing out in family systems as well. So I think it's just a really fundamental thing to learn and know more about. I think, growing up in Utah and in a family system that was influenced by the culture around us, this definitely showed up in my family system and in the church system as well. So I think it'll be interesting for people to kind of get a sense of how it plays out personally and in a system.
Yeah, and I'll say too, uh, if I'm raised in the '80s, and I think there was really unhealthy boundaries and very little teaching around you have a right to establish boundaries, you have a right to set parameters for how you interact with others. Give grandma a kiss. And I don't want to, and well, you have to give grandma a kiss, and maybe we'll talk about some of that here later. But I think we've entered an age now, and it feels like it's a strange thing. We've had civilization for so long, but it really has been the Western world in the last whatever decade and a half, maybe, where there are parts of the world that are finally having conversations that establish really healthy perspectives around boundaries. And I don't think if you go back 20, 30 years, pretty much anywhere on the planet, most people would tell you they were raised not to think about these kinds of things.
Well, yeah, and I think it's because people were sort of like children in particular for a long time were considered a commodity. They were, people had a lot of children so that they could have help on the farm. And so they were considered an extension, like uh, somebody who worked for the family system and they weren't individuals. And so I think as we, you know, uh, evolve to the point where we don't have to work so hard for our food and we have more free time, we have more time on our hands to individuate, to think about what we want as an individual. And I think that's part of why we're having this conversation now, because now we have the space for it. We're not so bogged down by having to, feed ourselves and stay safe all the time. I think we have a lot of freedoms that we didn't have before. So it's natural that we now are thinking a little bit more about like what makes us happy at a deeper level.
Yeah. So let's start off with defining boundaries. And the working definition that I put up here is that boundaries are invisible lines. Again, we're talking about boundaries in relationships, either your relationship with a system or your relationship with another person. Boundaries are the invisible lines that define what is me and what is not me, physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And we grant, at least in the Western world, we grant that a person has a right to their own body, their own space. They have a right to their own thoughts. They have a right to their own emotions. And I'm not going to say it's a perfect world in that, because I think there are lots of teachings, both in the school system, in high demand systems, in family systems, in your neighborhood, where there's pushback against those. But I think you get a room full of people, most people would agree that people have a right to their personal space in those areas. A safe boundary respects autonomy, consent, and mutual dignity. It allows connection, human connection, without violation. An unsafe boundary overrides autonomy, enforces one-way power, or demands self-erasure. It often is presented as protection, but in reality, it exposes people to harm. Any thoughts on the definition? Otherwise, I'll take
Nope.
the next one. So when we go to the next slide, how unsafe boundaries put humans at risk. And as this was being put together, the thing that was on my mind was I wanted to make sure that you, the audience, walked away clearly understanding what the harm is that unsafe boundaries can cause. We'll get into at the end how to establish safe boundaries or kind of how you navigate that, because I don't think it's anything that most people were trained on in their growing up process. And in this space where most of our audience are people who have left high demand religions, we recognize that those systems incorporated a lot of unhealthy boundaries or taught unsafe boundaries as being the safe boundary, for instance. But sometimes we don't talk about or wrestle with sort of the harm that was done by these. So I'll just say here, unsafe boundaries foster dependency rather than empowerment. So they push you to be dependent. You were talking about codependence, that systems create that. Please.
No, you're right. It's just systems of all kinds, because for a system to run, there has to be a kind of a hierarchy. And and that just it's the easiest way to make sure there's cohesion within the system itself, but it doesn't allow for individuation. It doesn't allow for unique expressions. We were talking about this on our hike about how, is there a possibility of having a secular kind of religious organization or spiritual organization, whatever it is, that allows people to sort of be who they are, but yet binds people enough that they stay in that system and utilize it for community and shared belief, whatever it is. And it's so hard to think of that actually being successful, because you need, on some level, the control. You need that hierarchy to bind people together, to drive people to keep coming. And if there's too much freedom, if everybody's just branching off and having new ideas about what the system should be, then you don't have cohesion. So it is really, it's really common to see it in systems, I think, for that reason. But I think we're still grappling with, how do we make this work? How do we create space for everybody to have their own individual expression and have enough flexibility in the system itself to allow people their own autonomy, but still allowing people to be bound to a collective in some way. So that's a question I'm always asking. I'm always curious about and trying to figure out what the solution for that is. But anyways, we continue talking about this. I think we'll be able to see, why this plays out in systems like this. And I don't know, get curious about maybe how we can move into a system that's a little different, that has a little bit more flexibility.
Yeah, and when we talk about unhealthy systems, they're unhealthy. First off, the system is built with certain goals in mind. It's built with goals to bring in as much financial wealth as possible. It's built to capture be appealing to the non-member, at least enough to keep the system replenished with new members. So it has to be charismatic and has to be able to proclaim that it has the answers to all of life's questions. People aren't, running up and standing in line for hours to join the Universalist Church. It really takes a lot of charisma and rigid claims to get people to buy in the numbers that certain systems are really aiming for. And so they'll have unhealthy mechanisms that are meant to accomplish that. And so what I'll say is that systems are intentionally designed, and I don't mean that like the leaders are behind the scenes going, how can we be unhealthy and do mean things and harsh things and unhealthy things to capture people. I don't mean it that way. I mean that the system, in prioritizing financial wealth, in prioritizing converts, in prioritizing that the born in the faith members feel loyalty and enough shame that they keep coming back thinking they're getting the fix. The system over time realizes what kinds of mechanisms work to accomplish those things. They are often unhealthy mechanisms, and so unhealthy systems have these. So they make unsafe boundaries make people vulnerable to emotional, physical, and sexual exploitation. And that's true. If you're pushed to trust its leaders implicitly and explicitly, if you're pushed to think that there is supernatural God magic when there isn't, if you're pushed to think that the anyone above you in the hierarchy is talking to God and you need to work harder to get some sort of access to that, then inevitably the system is going to have spaces within it where emotional, physical, and sexual exploitation can take place. Unsafe boundaries suppress the ability to say no. You are discouraged from autonomy. You're discouraged from free choice. You're discouraged from trusting your intuition. And you're discouraged from criticizing leadership. And all of these end up being a suppression of your ability to say no when you sense that that absolutely is what needs to be said in a moment. You suddenly find yourself scared or feeling shamed or embarrassed to even insert yourself that way.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, like, a boundary is what defines your own perimeter, which allows you to have an individuated sense of self. And when you have that boundary intact, you can actually sense into your own truth. You have a sense of what is true for you, and you know that it's okay to act in accordance with that. And so systems will often erase those boundaries. They don't allow you to have them because then you're too individualized. You do have your own sense of truth and right and wrong, and they need you not to have that in order for you to stay, connected to the group, or to outsource your truth and your power to, the system itself.
Yeah. It says here, it not only suppresses your ability to say no, but it notes that being able to say no to things is essential for a healthy relationship. And trying to think offhand, there was something I was going to say about. Oh yeah, the healthy relation in any healthy relationship, there has to be the freedom to make a reasonable request and to answer reasonably to a reasonable request. In other words, some requests might be deemed unreasonable. That's not what I mean. One People are going to be different. So people
Mhm.
may have different kinds of needs and they may want to ask for ways to fill those needs that the other person is deeply uncomfortable with and doesn't consider the request reasonable. What I mean by reasonable request is that you are 100% safe to say yes or no. And so if I come to you and say, "Hey, Teresa, I want to go on a date tomorrow and I want to go skydiving." And for me, that could be a reasonable request. For you, that could be unreasonable. And if it's unsafe to say no, because I'm going to mope for 2 weeks. I'm going to make critical comments about it. Uh I'm going to joke in ways that are trying to make you feel shame because you declined. That's not going to be healthy. You have to have the right in any request made in any relationship between two people in a romantic relationship, two friends in a friendship, a family system, in a faith community. When somebody asks you to say no or ask you a question, you have to have the right to say no. And you and I noticed right away that in Mormonism, one of the things we were taught was that callings come from God and you are not supposed to say no to them.
Mm.
And I just want to note to the audience that there's one instance, and there are 100 others, but there's one instance where you inside the system learn from an early age, watching things play out in your congregation, in your ward, that saying no is not allowed here. And over time, that kind of thing, over and over again in lots of different facets, breaks down your strength and ability to step forward and say, "No, I'm not going to do that." You learn in Mormonism and in a bunch of other systems you learn in Mormonism that no in lots of situations is not allowed.
Yeah.
I'll just note that. And then here, unsafe boundaries confuse members because the violation is framed as God's will, meaning they don't even recognize it as a violation. So exactly right there, that it's God's will that you take this calling, and you don't even recognize that that's a violation of your own sense of safety, your own sense of comfort. And if a system constantly says, "Don't you worry about your comfort level. Don't you worry about your safety. You just keep answering in the affirmative and doing what we tell you," then it doesn't take long before a young person is no longer capable of discerning where the line is of what is safe and what isn't, and making active choices for themselves to protect themselves. Anything else you want to say about this one?
Just that it starts so early. Again, it starts in the family system, and then spreads into the church system, because I think you're treated a certain way in the family. You're expected to follow the family's ideology, and again, it goes both ways. It's like the religious system teaches you how to show up as a human, and then you have children and and you raise your children that way from a very early age. So, and again, there's so many families who have codependency challenges. And one thing else I wanted to say is that a lot of times what will happen, you were talking about making reasonable requests, and sometimes somebody will make a request, they want to go do something, and the other person will say no, and that person may feel disappointment,
Mm.
which is a normal response, right? But for a codependent, recognizing that somebody else feels disappointment feels like annihilation to them. It's so uncomfortable to sit with somebody else's disappointment. So that's part of learning about boundaries, is recognizing that to shift that, you have to learn to be okay and let somebody else have their own response to things. If you say no, maybe somebody feels disappointed about it, and that's okay. But it does feel very painful to sit with that in the beginning.
Yeah, and I would say to our listeners out there who are parents of young children or grandparents of young children, it really is important that we provide experiences in an environment where kids can learn early on that it's okay to disappoint someone. There are times where you have to get the kid to do a thing. And so kids don't have agency in to the degree that adults do. And I'm not going to advocate that we just need to let kids have their way, but also we do need to provide them experiences in healthy context where they are allowed to say no. Someone is disappointed and a conversation ensues where the kid is it's explained to the kid that it's okay that grandma was disappointed. It's okay that the friend down the street was disappointed. It's okay that the teacher in the classroom is disappointed.
Yeah.
Kids need to learn, like they need to start learning at an early age that sometimes I have to do the thing for the better good of everyone, and sometimes when it's really important to my sense of safety or comfort, I can step out of this experience or out of this moment, and it doesn't matter if someone's disappointed. I have a right to
Yeah.
this degree of autonomy around things.
Well, and by the way, kids automatically have that anyway. It's taught out of them. Like a child automatically has a natural instinct for moving towards or moving away from something. They already know their yes and their no. We're the ones that corrupt that. So
Yeah. Yeah, I mentioned, like, give grandma a kiss earlier. When I was a kid, I was made to kiss the
yeah,
loving relatives in my world,
yeah,
and there were times where I would say no, and kids do that all the time where they just wanna be funny or they just aren't interested or whatever, and they don't want that. And in the 1980s, in the 1990s for that matter, we sort of make kids do those things, and nobody in our culture is saying the kid doesn't have to if they don't want to.
yeah,
And today, I'm not saying it's pervasive, but at least in my family, it's very clear that my grandkids have complete autonomy to say yes or no to those kinds of things. Uh, as a grandparent, I teach them and emphasize their ability to be autonomous in those kinds of situations. And I hear my kids give voice to those kinds of things when they're talking about what how they parent and how they teach their kids to be able to have uh, free choice over how those kinds of things play out. And I now look at it as weird when I see someone out there saying, "Nope, go give grandma a kiss." Um, it's a strange thing, and I point that out because I think it's so easy to find moments early in childhood to give kids the ability to go like, "Oh, my parents and my grandparents respect my right to decide here."
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
they learn sort of a strength of will.
I think it's a ritual. I think that's why we're so, used to playing out this ritual pattern of goodbye, right? And there's some idea that if we don't perform in that way, that somehow we don't have a complete ending to our our time together, because we have moment of connection, then we have the moment of disconnection where we then move on. But I think it is really unhealthy when it's forced. It always makes me really uncomfortable, and I was always forced to. And then, my great grandfather was a really sweet guy, but he had these giant lips, and he would just like pucker his lips, and I would be expected to kiss him on the lips, and I hated it. And I never got the choice about that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. So I say all that so that hopefully, as you share your life experiences, I share some of mine, that folks will, if you're out there, I'm not judging you. I think generally, as you point out, it's the ritual and it's how we were taught and it's how it got passed down. But if that's the way your family's still doing it, maybe notice that kids, by being told they have to do those kinds of things, are learning early on that an adult voice telling them to do something that they're uncomfortable doing, that they just have to do it.
Yep.
And maybe there are other ways to give them the empowerment so that they can begin to say no when they don't feel safe or comfortable.
Yeah.
Um, all right, boundary categories. I named them here on the left. I want to get your thoughts on these. The right is an image off the internet. So the one on the right, they're picking out 5 categories. I think I end up using 4 of these as well. And then I have 2 additional ones. So I've got 6, that's got 5. I'll just note here physical boundaries. So these are the kinds of boundaries that you set in relationships. Physical boundaries, control over your body, your personal space, your health, your sexuality. Violations such as pressuring youth into private worthiness interviews, forcing a kid to go into a room with an adult who just happens to be in that position because he was chosen by other adults and he lives in the neighborhood, and having them sit alone in a room with that person, and that person is going to have power over them in that they're being taught that that person speaks to God, he has stewardship over them, they have a responsibility to address their worthiness with this person, they have a responsibility to declare answers to this person's questions, and some of those questions, at least to some degree, will be sexual in nature. Um, that to me is such a big violation that Mormons to this day will justify as the right thing to do. Forcing dress codes, purity pledges, fasting, and medical restrictions. The Jehovah's Witnesses don't allow blood transfusions. I think um, they may finally sort of let that be, but at least for the long part of their history, they would not let their members. So if you were in a health crisis, you had to choose between loyalty to your religion and the high risk of this going south if you're not allowed a blood transfusion. Insane. Using touch or laying on of hands without consent. The message given is your body is not your own. It belongs to God or the church. So there's that. Emotional boundaries, definition, right to your own feelings and inner experiences. So shaming or negative emotions as sin. Anger, doubt, shaming negative emotions as sin. So taking things like anger, doubt, sadness, and making or contention. In Mormonism, contention is of the devil. So if the believer comes with a very faithful dialogue, and there are contradictions in that, There are problems with what you're being told, and you push back against that to say, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with these teachings. I don't think this thing adds up. I don't agree that this is the way the history played out. The thing the believer is taught is to immediately judge that as contentious and to judge you as having lost the spirit.
Yeah.
And so now you're shamed for having an opposing viewpoint to something that deserves an opposing viewpoint because it's full of contradictions and problems. Emotional boundaries, another way that this shows up is using guilt or fear as a tool of control, pressuring members to forgive without justice. And so the message in this category is if you feel hurt, it's your fault. Holy people shouldn't feel that way. There's a lot of that goes on. Any thoughts you have on physical boundaries or emotional boundaries
Yes.
here?
So just one thought on physical boundaries is, growing up as a kid, I wasn't allowed to have a lock on the bathroom door. My mom would flip out if I locked the bathroom door, trying to have some privacy. And that was a violation of my physical boundaries, especially as I was going through puberty and felt really vulnerable in that process. And then I know people who have like not allowed their children to have locks on the inside of their doors and they turned the door around so they could lock the child in
Mm.
to their bedroom, which freaked me out. That to me felt like such a violation. Like you're not allowed to have your own space. Um, and then emotional boundaries, especially in systems. So I remember being at girls' camp. I was probably 14 or so, maybe 15. And, it was fast and testimony meeting around the campfire. It's always the last day, and the bishop comes and, everybody's sharing their testimonies one at a time. And, and I'm refusing, like, I'm not going to do this. I didn't feel comfortable with it. I didn't understand. I wasn't raised in the church. I started going when I was about 12. I was baptized at 10 and then didn't start going till about 12. And so it was never something that my family normalized. And I was really shy and really afraid of messing up or saying the wrong thing. Plus, I didn't really technically have a testimony. I didn't know who the hell Joseph Smith really was. I'd never read the Book of Mormon. I was in church just to sort of, fit in, but I never felt like I did. And so I remember sitting it out, and they just kept looking at me. And I was like, no, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna share my testimony. And they like the bishop just stared at me and they kept like they wouldn't accept my no. And I felt so much pressure. I never did. I refused. I was not going to do it because I felt too uncomfortable. But I also felt so shamed and harassed. And it felt like a massive violation. And that happens a lot. It's like this drive to push people to do the thing because I think it's the right thing. You got to be part of the system.
Yeah, you're in the emotional side, you're often told that if you're living the gospel of Jesus Christ, then this is how you will feel. This is how you will present to the outside world. This is how things will go for you. And you set people up with a false idea that things will go a certain way, certain things will be felt a certain way by one who's checking all the boxes and doing Mormonism the right way. And so then when that doesn't happen, rather than any space for you to go, hey, maybe this doesn't work. Maybe this doesn't work the way they say it does. The system is designed to label you as bad and make you the problem. The person that is not in alignment
Mhm.
with orthodoxy is always painted as being the problem, not the religious system's orthodoxy. I just find that to be such a obviously unhealthy, but it's such a captivating thing because it's the only lens with which you've grown up in. It's the only way you understand how to make meaning out of the world, and you've been tricked into placing judgment on everyone else around you and feeling shame and insecurity when you yourself aren't showing up the way that the religion prescribes. So there's that. Okay, so number 3 here, cognitive boundaries, autonomy over your beliefs, thoughts, perceptions. Violation examples are labeling independent thought as pride or Satan's influence. It's so strange. if I asked, and I've said this before, but if I said, Teresa, I want you to believe in leprechauns, and I need you to work really hard at it, but I want you to come back in our next week's show, and I want you to declare to everyone that you believe in leprechauns. Well, whether leprechauns are real or not, there is so little evidence, and what little evidence there is just people sort of going like, "Oh, look, there's just this mark in the dirt, and it must be the footprint of a leprechaun," or "I saw something out of the corner of my eye," or people with mental illness claiming they see things. The actual evidence for leprechauns is zilch, and so it's very normal to go like, "I don't have to believe in leprechauns. That's absurd, and I can only believe in what my brain tells me to believe in." Then you step into this religious system, and there's 100 of them, but let's use Mormonism. You're born into a system that declares itself to be the one true church. It claims all the things that Joseph Smith saw God in Jesus, that priesthood's been restored, that these men are prophets, they hold keys, temples are the ordinances that take you back to heaven. And if, as you explore that, you go, well, that's absurd. That doesn't make sense. Anywhere else in your life, you're allowed to let your brain rule the day and decide what's true and what isn't for you. But when it comes to religious systems, they say, no, 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 you can't do that. If you're going to be in this thing, you must agree with all these things. You must believe in these certain uh, checkpoints, these certain touchstones. And it's such a strange thing to me that you can't just go in the direction that your brain tells you to. Otherwise, you become antagonistic to the system, and they make it really clear that to be in this thing, you can't be this way. And I want to note that. But then the next one here is relational boundaries, freedom to choose who you're connected to and how. So shunning and disfellowshipping. So here you are, you're in the congregation. This is your community. You love these people. You enjoy serving these people. These are the friendships you enjoy every week. Suddenly you don't believe in the things anymore, and the system is who has control to send you packing. You don't have control to make the system change. The system has control to send you away. And so it decides the relational boundaries. You have no say on them. It requires loyalty to leaders over family ties. Some systems arrange marriages or restrict friendships. You can't decide who belongs in your life. We decide for you. Any thoughts you have on cognitive boundaries or relational boundaries?
Well, the relational boundaries reminds me of one of the topics you brought up in your last Mormonism Live about President Oakes and what he said about having a gay son and where, at what level he would allow his son, hypothetical gay son, to interact with the family. And, he made that statement as a way of sort of framing, this is how you should treat a family member who is like this. This is the boundary that you should hold in your life if you're going to be righteous.
Yeah, it gets to create the boundary where it wants it. Excuse me, it gets to create the boundary where it wants it, and you don't get to. And it's, again, strange thing. The church is at the point now where it acknowledges that a gay member of the church didn't choose that. It is simply who they are and the inclinations that they were born with. And yet we still have on the church website a leader who says that because you were born this way and because you're living out your life in the way that you see as being right and fit for you, as your parent, I have to draw a line and choose loyalty to this system. And hence, I can't introduce you to my friends, and you certainly can't stay overnight. And I'm not going to do anything that would put you in contact with other people around me as if this has some sort of approval by me.
Mhm.
And it's such a strange way to navigate a family relationship. But those kinds of decisions are often rooted in homophobia, prejudice, bigotry. And Yeah, you go back in time far enough, there were 100 other things that we were prejudiced and bigoted over, and we've had to learn this lesson over and over and over again as humans in this society and every other society. We've had to learn that maybe it's us who come up with these stupid arbitrary constructs around what is right and what is wrong, to the point where in the Bible, left-handedness is bad. In the 1950s, having uh, having skin color that's dark is bad.
Mhm.
Um, and now we're dealing with being gay being bad or being trans being bad. And I hope someday we get enough of these moments that we look back and go, oh, it's just one of those again where we just were being stupid as people.
Yeah.
Uh, so hopefully that happens. Uh, and then 5 and 6 here, time and life boundaries, control over your own time, energy, life path. So mandatory missions or service, exhaustive meeting schedules. It's better now, but when I hear the generation behind me talk about the LDS church, you're there on Monday night, you're there on Wednesday night, you're there on Saturday, you're working on the church garden on Saturday, you're doing mutual this night, you've got primary that night, you've got Sunday school comes in for a different week, a different evening of the night, and at least now they've gone from the 3-hour church down to 2, and it definitely has moved in the direction of giving people more agency over their time. Um, but I would at least note that it didn't used to be that way. And then also expectation to prioritize church over education, career,
Yeah.
rest, or I'll say self-care. Message given, your time is not yours, it belongs to the Lord's work. And it's to the point that when you go to the temple, one unhealthy boundary distortion that is used to exist there was that prior to making all of these covenants and temple penalties where you would promise to take your life if you didn't keep the secrets, it would say you're about to make some covenants. If you want to step away, you can, but it wouldn't tell you what the covenants are. And so you'd go to the temple not knowing what you were getting into, and you had to agree to stay before you knew what it was that you were agreeing to stay for.
Yeah.
Um, but then one of the covenants that you make is that you give everything, including up to your life, to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the law of sacrifice. And so this thing, without any preparation, gets you to, again, in a legal situation, there's certain things that we would deem as non-binding. So if we force someone to sign a contract, if we trick someone in some way so as to manipulate them into signing the contract without them having the time or safety to read it and know what they're getting into. And what Mormonism did in the temple, and still does to some degree, but it's taken out the most egregious, is it tricked you into making promises in the right now. You don't have any other time to decide. Decide it now. Do the thing, and everyone else in the room is doing the thing, so you do it too. And so then you've obliged yourself to certain commitments without any time to really understand what the commitment was going to be and having the safety to say no to it. Um, and then there's also financial boundaries, right to control your own resources. Violations here are mandatory tithing as a requirement for spiritual privileges, pressure to sacrifice financially for building projects or leaders. You and I have had conversations that involve a lot of the, like, how rich the TV evangelists are. Their houses are huge mansions. They have private airplanes. They have so much money, and and yet they stand in front of people and shame them and guilt them and high pressure them into giving more and more money to them. And in Mormonism, for instance, in Africa, President Nelson at one time told the African saints that if they wanted to get out of poverty, they had to pay their tithing, and that if they paid their tithing, they would in fact get out of poverty. And I just know outside the church that I now know that that's just not even a logical thing that could happen. And it doesn't happen. So there is no supernatural magic that's intervening either. All right. So financial boundaries, mandatory tithing is a requirement for spiritual privileges, pressure to sacrifice financially for building projects or leaders. And the last one is a lack of transparency in how funds are used. The TV evangelist, uh, the church pastor who makes good money, the LDS church leaders, the Jehovah's Witnesses, their leadership council. Nobody tells you how much is coming in. Nobody tells you what it's going to, and it almost never goes to the things you think it is going to. So pressure to sacrifice financially for building projects or leaders, lack of transparency in how funds are used, message given, your money is not yours. It proves your worthiness. And that's what unhealthy systems do. Any thoughts you have on time and life boundaries or financial boundaries?
Yeah. So my friend growing up was the daughter of a stake president. And I remember how many times she reflected back on her childhood and thought, my dad was never home. So here in the LDS church, they focus on family, but yet they call these people into positions of leadership where they cannot be home for their families. And that was a big loss to her. She felt a lot of anger towards the church for that. And then financial boundaries, it reminds me of the documentary we watched on Twin Flames where, it was essentially a cult and they controlled everybody's finances, told them, how much to give, had them essentially doing work for free, similar to what the church does, and then glorifying in their own wealth and sort of rubbing that into all the other people's faces about how much money they had and how they were so worthy of it, which was such an interesting thing because I don't know how people were able to sort of justify that and not think that that was really weird, but they were stuck in that cult system. So yeah, that's a definite way that people can be exploited is through the financial boundaries aspect.
I'd highly recommend people go watch the Twin Flame documentary. You watched it, I think, maybe before, and then
I did.
you and I are watching. So I'm watching it for the first time, but with you again. And what amazes me about that is the leadership is this couple. They're young. I'm going to say they're a little dweeby. Uh,
Mhm.
I don't think they have any sort of. They don't exude confidence.
No, or charisma, really. It's really fascinating how they ever got off the ground. I think after that documentary, we were joking around, being like, "Well, we could create a religion. Like that wouldn't be that hard. If
No,
these people can do it, like man, anyone can do it." So kind of funny. But in that documentary, they pretty much violated every type of boundary there is.
Mhm.
Telling people to the point that they were telling people what gender identity they were, what their sexuality was, who their partner was going to be, everything. It was crazy what they should eat. They told people that they needed to become more grounded, and they prescribed this high calorie diet, and people gained so much weight because they were following what they thought they should be doing. It was just so gross. Yeah.
Yeah, and my point with that was that everyone should watch it because everyone would realize how little it takes to manipulate a group of people.
Yeah.
That you don't even have to be good at it. If you're unhealthy, if your intention is to build a spiritual system that manipulates people into giving you their autonomy, uh, handing it over, giving you their money, and following you with some sort of loyalty, it wouldn't take any work at all. Anybody could do it because these folks, if anybody should have failed at it, these guys should have failed at it, and
Yeah.
they've made probably millions at this point off of it.
They had no shame. I think that's what it was. They just pushed boundaries like nobody else, and they found the people who had no sense of boundaries, who had no sense of self, and who really didn't know that they could say no. So again, this is part of why we're doing this, is to just sort of illustrate how that can happen, why we don't have access to our own felt sense boundaries, and how to shift that.
Uh, what what's What was that streaming on? Was that Netflix?
It was Netflix, yeah, and it's
Yeah.
called, like, Twin Flames Universe or something like that, something about twin flames.
Yeah, one says Escaping Twin Flames.
Yeah.
Okay. So check that out, folks. I think you'll learn a lot about how high demand, unhealthy systems work, and they don't even have to be that good at it. And so then when you find a system like Mormonism, which has had a few hundred years and sort of taken it really seriously on how to get people to do these things, uh, it's no wonder it's so effective at it. So just to note that. All right, examples of unsafe boundaries within high demand religions.
I think we did some of these already, but there's a couple we haven't.
Yeah, so I'll just say the topic, and people can pause this and read these. But unsupervised worthiness interviews for the youth in the LDS Church, Jehovah's Witnesses two-witness rule. So victims of abuse must produce two witnesses to the event before elders will act, when almost all abuse only involves an abuser and a victim. So if the abuser has the benefit of the victim needing to have two witnesses, then so much abuse can never be challenged. And imagine, it's one thing if somebody's done something once and we go, hey, it's a he said, she said, there's nothing we can do. There isn't any evidence. But in this system, some people have been accused over and over and over again, but in each instance, there isn't two witnesses. And so a pattern of abuse is happening and nobody has the empowerment to be able to stop it. To me, that's just crazy. Scientology auditing and confessionals. So Scientology uses these electronic devices to sort of measure different electrical currents, for instance, in the body, or certain breathing patterns or heart rates. And they get you to admit to all the things you've sinned in during the course of your life, and then hold that over your head as you get further into Scientology. So to me, that's crazy. Jehovah's Witnesses and the Amish and Latter-day Saints have forms of shunning or disfellowshipping. Evangelical, Latter-day Saints, and Catholics have gender and marital submission. So in Mormonism, it is to obey your husband as he obeys God. And so women are always down the hierarchy. And you're taught it's different but equal. But the way it plays out is the men are the boss and the women need to follow.
Mm.
So there's that. Any thoughts on any of those?
Just the gender and marital submission thing, that's such a downstream effect of patriarchy, and I used to read these, historical romance novels all the time, which I thought were really interesting because there were a lot of historical, aspects to learn about, but the attitudes at that time were that women were chattel, they were a possession of a man, they had no rights, and their job was to submit sexually to a man to fulfill their wifely duties, which I think is the grossest idea. But, I think that's also been taught um, in different, high demand, religions, and also that's what was taught in the twin flames thing too. That was another thing that was really gross about that documentary, was basically they told that was what a woman's role was. So,
In the Old Testament, if a woman is raped, her rapist can go to her father and pay a certain price, and the price is laid out, 10 shekels of silver, whatever it was. And by paying the father, you buy the right to then be able to marry the woman you just raped, who is your victim.
yeah.
And religion goes, yeah. I mean, that's the old law, but that's how God was. He was, he let these things happen. When you teach people to not trust their intuition, but instead they must hand that over to a book of rules written thousands of years ago, based in mythological stories and arbitrary constructs of rules, and many of them not even being healthy, what you end up with then is a whole group of people in a system who don't know how to even discern what healthy and unhealthy is, because they've been taught from the moment they were born not to trust their gut about these things.
Yeah.
Uh, anyway, any thoughts there?
No, it's just I think it's gross, and those attitudes have continued to sort of permeate our society in different ways, and it affects people still today. So
Yeah. I want to get your thoughts here in depth. The harm caused, unsafe boundaries in religion cause complex trauma, attachment wounds, hypervigilance, identity suppression, and shame-based living. Um, is there any on that list that really strike you as something you want to speak to?
I mean, all of it really, like even just definitely complex trauma. When you are, yeah, I see this all the time in some of the clients I work with, where there's no sense of self. There's such a fear to make a choice for themselves. They don't even know what their own needs are. They're constantly looking outward to see what somebody else, needs, so that they can maintain connection at the cost of themselves. So there's a constant self denial that comes up with that, and fear of even recognizing or setting boundaries, saying no to something. Um, which creates then hypervigilance in their system that is connected to the expression of chronic illness. Because when you're constantly hypervigilant to the needs of somebody else and you don't know that you have a right to say no, you can't create a safe boundary, so you can't feel safety inside of your own body, and that leads to all kinds of emotional and physical symptoms, which is horrible. And then you just don't even know who you are. You don't feel like you can be your authentic self. You again, back to hypervigilance, you're always on edge because you're trying to figure out how to respond to the external world. That's all you can see is out there. It's almost like there's they call it like Swiss cheese boundaries, when there's nothing between you and everything else. And so you're constantly hyper focused on outside. Um, and yeah, shame-based living, there's a lot of shame, because and this goes in line with like codependency, where somebody else's behavior can be internalized as something you've done wrong. So if somebody else behaves in a certain way or feels a certain thing, you will internalize it as, oh my God, it must be something about me. I caused that. And codependency in and of itself requires the person to constantly um, shift their own needs and thoughts and feelings in order to accommodate somebody else feeling okay, because the fundamental idea of codependency is I'm not okay unless you're okay. So you're constantly trying to do whatever you can to appease another person so that they appear okay and you feel safe. And it's really messed up. So when I said something earlier on about how lack of boundaries is really deeply connected to codependency, that's how you have to, in order to sort of heal that, you have to learn where your boundaries are. You have to normalize your own needs. You have to start slowly and gently saying no in a tolerable way until you get to the place that you can handle the discomfort that comes up within you when you do say no, realizing that somebody else's response to that is their own, and you're not, that's not gonna reflect on your safety or ability to be okay in the world. So yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And I'm thinking, again, go back 100,000 years. We're in the jungle, we're in the forest, we're uh, a threat shows up, and our nervous system goes on high alert. And you and I have talked about in past episodes, we've had so many conversations together around the different states that your body can be sent into and the different kinds of reactions, whether it's shutting down, whether it's fighting. Um, Whenever we perceive a threat, our body is naturally going to respond. And in a unhealthy system, when something shows up as discomfort, borderline threat, or is in fact a threat of some sort, your normal way of handling it in order to protect yourself, to ensure that you get the safety you need, that those kinds of responses are criticized, and you are handed a whole different playbook for how to handle those. So now
Yeah.
a moment comes where you encounter a church leader when you're a kid in a situation where you didn't feel safe, but for which you were made to feel by your parents and the system and everyone around you that you had to engage in a certain way. So now you have to suppress your body's response and simply do the thing. But as you incur instances where everything wasn't quite on the up and up, things didn't continue to not feel safe, you're constantly having to override your system. And whether it's hypervigilance, whether it's uh, unhealthy kinds of attachments. So one might be avoidant, one might be anxious, one might be codependent. You mentioned that. Hypervigilance, you might end up with tons of anxiety around situations because you've never felt empowered to hold your ground and to take up space and to create boundaries wherever you need them. And then you move through life and this has been distorted and you've never gotten back to neutral. You've never gotten back to where, like, hey, I'm 45 years old and I feel absolutely empowered and safe to set my own boundaries. And so you continue to carry with you these body responses, these intrusive thoughts, uh, these high levels of anxiety in situations that come close to what you had experienced in the past. These systems, by giving you a certain lens to see the world through and creating all of the meaning for you and distorting boundaries, it really is a difficult thing for me and a difficult thing for the people that I interact with trying to help, for them to get into all of that, figure it all out, and begin to unravel it so that they
Mhm.
can begin to work towards getting back to some place near neutral.
Yeah, and fundamentally, a lack of boundaries puts you in a position where you don't feel safe in the world. You don't get to enact safety measures to feel okay in the world. And trauma in and of itself is really fundamentally a situation where you didn't get to react or have the protective response that supported uh, getting to safety or whatever. So, for example, um, if you weren't able to say no and you went into freeze and somebody violated you on a physical level or whatever, your system, what it maybe wanted to do but wasn't able to do is fight, right? It maybe had a fight response that was suppressed, and so instead your system had to collapse and shut down. And then you hold this trauma response because there's a helplessness that's inside of you. And there are some different modalities, like somatic experiencing, that would help a person process that that response that didn't get to happen, and they would maybe even process somatically moving through, like pushing away when they think of that situation that they felt helpless in. And by even engaging the muscles in a way that says like no, or even utilizing your voice to say the thing you didn't get to say, it can help reboot your system so it comes back into feeling empowered rather than disempowered. And but when you don't have access to boundaries, you're never told that you have a right to them, you don't have protection. You literally don't have protection. And so you can go through the world feeling either completely vulnerable all the time and hyper vigilant and on alert, or the opposite that can happen is you just completely disconnect from your body. You become numb. You have you tend to sort of go through life a little bit foggy or depressed or just shut down. And those are no way to live a healthy life. And so it has an enormous impact on how people function in this world.
Yeah. So another, how this trauma shows up in the victim's future, struggle with saying no, boundaries feel selfish or dangerous. You over apologize. So maybe, folks, if you're listening to this, notice
Mm.
if any of these show up as a pattern in your life. Do you struggle to say no? Do you feel like, even though it's in your best interest to say no at times that you feel a lot of pressure because of past experiences to avoid saying no to someone? Do you over apologize or people please to avoid conflict? Do you experience high anxiety in relationships, expecting that a violation is going to occur? Do you feel disoriented about autonomy? Do I even know what I want? Do you have difficulty trusting institutions, workplaces, therapists, even healthy communities? Feel you have apprehensiveness or you feel unsafe around? Um, and then I would just note too, if you notice any of those, maybe take a moment and think about all the ways in which that limits you or prevents you from living your best life or gets in the way of you feeling safe or being happy and content. Any thoughts here on how trauma shows up from these things happening to them in their future?
No, it's just similar to what I sort of shared already, and I wanna get to the part where we talk about what can help survivors.
I love it. So, what can help survivors? Do you want to go through this list and share some thoughts?
Yeah, so, psychoeducation on boundaries is massive, like, incredibly important. Um, Being able to sort of reframe this idea that boundaries are inherently wrong, understanding that they're not selfish, that they are protective and healthy. There's a ton of books out there. In fact, we might link something in the notes, show notes that there's a therapist group that I'm familiar with, and they have a huge list of incredible resources on boundaries. So really leaning into getting psychoeducation about it, that can help change your mindset about, okay, this is actually a healthy thing I'm doing, even though it feels really awkward and uncomfortable. Understanding why we need to do that and how it can really help us to feel more safety is really helpful. Thematic practices, so body awareness exercises. Um, I think I shared one in our last podcast where Dr. Peter Levine sort of has people um, do a couple different exercises to identify their somatic body boundaries. So that's really helpful to do. You can do some searches for Peter Levine body boundary exercises, and he has some really cool things. He's such a gentle human being. I love the work that he's done. He also has some incredible books out there. I think Waking the Tiger. There's a couple other ones that are really good. So, doing those somatic practices, um, and rehearsing saying no is also really, really helpful. You can just play around with this. Sometimes, also what's really important about like rehearsing saying no is you can speak out loud, either with another person that you feel safe with or on your own. And when you there's an idea out there that when you actually talk out loud to yourself, so let's say that you're having anxiety or you're feeling some intensity and you speak to yourself like out loud, it has a deeper impact than if you just think a thought inside. So if you're thinking calming thoughts inside, you actually have more of an impact if you say it out loud. So when you do this rehearsal of no, you can speak out loud and actually practice saying no to things. Um, Rebuilding autonomy, encouraging survivors to make small daily choices. What do I want to eat? What clothes do I want to wear? What activities do I want to do to relearn agency? And um, that might seem, what's the word I'm looking for? Extreme, I guess. But for some people, they really have a hard time even connecting to that. And this is actually really common in people who've come out of fundamentalist polygamous societies where they didn't get to choose what they wore. They didn't get to choose really what they ate. They didn't get to choose what they did. And so they have to, go back and make the smallest of choices to figure out where they have agency in life and work through what comes up with that. Because for people that have been through that level of control, making small choices is gonna bring up a big internal reaction. It's gonna feel so unfamiliar. Um, Community with healthy boundaries. So support groups, like ex-religious trauma groups, where boundaries are modeled and respected. Bill and I have one of those coming up if anyone's interested in that. And also there's so many great resources on like Instagram, some great content creators who do a lot of stuff around boundaries. There's a content creator. I don't know that she's doing as much on it now, but she has a lot of old content. Her name is Haley Page McGee, and she does a beautiful job talking about boundaries. And then trauma informed therapy or coaching, approaches like IFS, somatic experiencing, like I talked about, that's Peter Levine's process, or trauma informed coaching that can focus on restoring agency and boundary safety. And again, I'll just say, like, when you move through this process of starting to implement more boundaries, it's not like something that you do and, like, I don't know, rip the Band-Aid off, so to speak. You can go really slowly. You can start making really small choices or practicing saying no in ways that feel really tolerable and okay, rather than just going all out there and trying to trying to assert boundaries immediately. So sometimes taking it slow can make it easier for your system to kind of adapt to that. Any thoughts for you on this?
Yeah, just that these are great tools. And as you went through the list, I'm thinking about situations where these would be great things to practice with clients. So if a client came to me and I was coaching them, and it was clear that they didn't feel safe saying no, that there we could do sort of role playing and give them chances to model conversations that might happen in their life where and again, as you point out, we can start off uh as minimal or as small of a thing as they think is just, it doesn't matter a whole lot, but I might feel a little discomfort there, and give them chances to practice saying no.
Yeah.
uh Somatic practices, giving them a chance to get into their body and recognize that when these moments happen, what do you feel inside? Where do you feel it? Uh, what are your thoughts around feeling that, and where does that go back to? And give them a chance to talk about what it is they're experiencing, what they notice about it, and in the environment of meeting with a coach or with a therapist, you're in a safe space. So there is no threat. There's almost certainly not going to be judgment or shame. And so you can just feel the thing and it isn't wrong. And so
Yeah.
there's great opportunities, I think, in these spaces to get outside of the way things work in the world and begin to establish a new pattern because safety is present.
Yeah, and I wanna say one thing about working with a coach or a therapist. It's really important to make sure that that coach or therapist is trauma informed. Not all therapists have the ability to give safe responses to choice. And one thing I do with clients is I will ask repeatedly, and I will offer them choices throughout, and I will continue to model that I am okay no matter what, and I will continue to model that, like, my like, what's most important for me is their comfort and safety, and making it as easy as possible for them to say no if they need to, so that they can start, from that level of safety, and then eventually they can start speaking out more and know that I will always respond completely okay with that. There have been people who've told me that they have, in a therapeutic relationship, met a therapist or somebody else who didn't reflect that, who reflected, who discounted their needs or their feelings, or yeah, gaslit them, or didn't accept their truth, and that's been very painful. So if you ever encounter that in a therapeutic relationship, that is an indication you need to exit that therapeutic relationship, because it's not going to help you.
Yeah, that therapist or coach might have unhealthy boundaries. All right. So
Yeah.
I 100% agree with you. And uh, folks, my greatest wish is that we can help this community more fully trust their intuition.
Yeah.
Um, but that is so hard when over and over and over again you've been taught to distrust it. Lastly, I think this is one of the last sections here: advice on creating and maintaining safe boundaries. Learn to trust your inner signals. We've just said that. Name your non negotiables. It's one thing to think in your head, like, I would never do that. I would never be pushed into that. But what often happens is you're not ready for the situation. You're caught off guard because you never even knew that situation was going to happen. So sitting down either on your own as you journal, uh, some form of having a conversation with yourself or sitting down with a trusted friend or loved one, somebody who makes it really safe for you to take up space and to feel what you feel, or with a therapist or coach. One of the activities you could do is just name out your non-negotiables.
Yeah.
And I think saying it out loud, you pointed earlier to saying things out loud. I think in this instance, saying it out loud will give it more empowerment,
Yeah.
have you feeling stronger about holding that ground and not giving not giving in and doing what others want you to do simply because you don't want to let them down, but holding the ground on what you need to be safe. And then practice saying no. We talked about that one already. Without over explaining. You don't need to explain your no's. You might have to give the tiniest bit of context just so someone can make sense of what you're saying, but you don't need to justify saying no. Again, if somebody has a healthy relationship with you, for the most part, almost entirely, any request they make should be a reasonable request, meaning that you have full safety to say no. And if you find yourself having to always over explain, maybe consider that that's either A, an indication of the experiences that have happened to you in the past, or B, that the person that you're in connection with isn't operating from a healthy space themselves.
Yeah. I
Uh,
just wanna say, one thing here, which is there was a time when I was single. I went a long period of time being single, and I was living, with family at the time, and people automatically saw me as like, "Oh, I bet she'd love to house sit. I bet she would love to take care of her animals." And I, felt a lot of pressure to have to try to say yes or explain why I didn't really want to. And then I finally just decided after I'd done it enough times and I really decided I don't like house sitting for people. I don't like taking care of people's animals. For me, it was because it felt like, one time somebody's dog ran away and I didn't want to have that responsibility. So I just created a boundary, which was like, I don't house sit and I don't animal sit. Like it's just something I don't do. And so that was my non-negotiable, and I utilized it whenever somebody had, asked me to do that, and it was really easy to say no. So, it's really helpful if you can think about what it is that you don't want to do, and just state, "Hey, this is just my policy, like, I just don't do that." And and it's a universal thing, it's not something about somebody else, so it's really helpful.
yeah. And I don't necessarily wanna go back through these, but I just wanna note, for instance, learn to trust your inner signals.
Mhm.
Tight chest, nausea. I mentioned the shaking hand in a conversation that
Yeah.
we were interviewed by Rebecca Biblioteca, and I think that'll come out on Tuesday. Um, but notice the cues that your body is giving you to tell you. It's trying to tell you something, and believe it. Trust the signals your body is telling you. Now, yes, if you had a lifetime of unhealthy people imposing trauma on you, you might be in a situation where you are sitting across from the healthiest person around, and yet you still have these things come up. But if the person truly is healthy, there should be a safe space there for you to feel things because of what happened in the past.
Yeah.
That person to make it safe for you to feel those things. Um, name your non-negotiables. Write down the areas where you need autonomy: your time, your body, your money, your emotions. And then the last one, practice saying no. Religion often teaches that no equals rebellion. In reality, no is a sacred word.
Mhm.
Try short, clear responses. That doesn't work for me. No, I'm not comfortable with that. Don't justify endlessly. Safe people will respect your no. Unsafe people have a pattern of pushing back. So notice that. Test for reciprocity. So safe boundary is mutual. If you say, I need X, and the other person also feels free to say, I need Y, you're in a safe dynamic. If boundaries only ever flow one way, then that seems like an unsafe a relationship with unsafe boundaries. Get comfortable with discomfort. Saying no after years of religious conditioning will feel wrong at first. Remind yourself discomfort doesn't mean I'm unsafe. It means I'm learning a new pattern. Um, audit the shoulds in your life. I think that's an interesting phrase. Audit the shoulds in your life. If a request or rule comes with heavy shoulds, you should attend every meeting. You should accept every calling. You should forgive every person who's wronged you. Pause. Ask, who benefits if I obey this should? Does it honor my well-being or just serve the system? And I think that question alone would point to what's really going on in these situations in a lot of them. Number 7, build a boundary-safe community. Surround yourself with people who model consent, who model respect and autonomy. Peer support groups, therapy, friendships where boundaries are celebrated help rewire your sense of what's normal. Any thoughts on those 4?
Yeah, just one on reciprocity. That's a really big one. And I went through again this phase of trying to decide like what kind of friendships do I want and what are the values I want in those friendships. And the biggest one for me was reciprocity. So I use that as a metric as I'm engaging with somebody to decide whether or not I want to continue to feed that relationship or if I want to walk away from it. Because it's important for it to be reciprocal and for it there to be safety and being able to ask for my needs to be met and for that person to also ask and receive. And then I'll say like building a boundary safe community. That's such a good way to get a felt sense and to practice, uh, experiencing what safe boundaries feel like. And it's a really healing environment. And I'll just say that like I've noticed this even in my relationship with you, Bill, because you are so good at modeling consent and respect and giving autonomy. And that has given me more space to really, truly be able to express my yeses and my nos. And I love that. Yeah. And this is something that will unwind in your system over time. Like it's not an automatic thing. It takes time to undo this stuff. And, I was somebody who didn't have any boundaries at all. I wasn't raised in a family system or a cultural system that reinforced that it was okay to have those.
And I'll just say, I'm not perfect at it. In fact, we had a situation the other day where I had volunteered us for something
Okay.
and you had notified me that you weren't comfortable with that thing. And because I didn't see the big deal, I sort of shamed you for seeing a big deal.
Yeah, but what I love about it though is I didn't care. And
Yeah.
normally I would have caved. Normally I would have been like, "Oh my gosh, is he uncomfortable?" And I thought, "Well, if he's uncomfortable with that, that's okay. I'll let him have that." And that's the work I've done to be able to allow another person to feel disappointment or um, maybe inconvenienced by a different thing that I need. And to me, that was a win. So even though it showed up in that way, you don't have to be perfect, but I would say that that showed me I have a lot of safety in the relationship to say no and let you feel what you feel. So,
Yeah, and I will add that one of the things I've learned to do that I wouldn't have done 10 years ago, I would have kept fighting you on it. I would have
yeah.
But one of the things I've learned to do in the last few years is to the moment I'm notified that uh, I want to get the right word, that I misappropriated the situation, that I
Mhm.
decided for you what was safe to do, unsafe to do, what was not a big deal, what is a big deal. And I self-corrected quickly. I think my next response, soon as you let me know that that was uncomfortable, I realized like, oh, the problem's me. I need to take a step back. I need to honor that that doesn't feel safe to you. It doesn't feel comfortable to you. It's not beneficial to you, and make it completely okay that you felt that way, and apologize for having intruded on your safety and overstep my bounds by telling you what your boundaries should be.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh, so anyway, there's that. So I'll add here to the screen this one. And I switched it over because the original slideshow just had the body keeps the score. And you and I had a conversation about this earlier. So
Yeah.
we'll talk about that here. But number 8 is get educated. Read resources like Boundaries by Cloud and Townsend. That's that middle book there with the red border at the bottom. The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And then Set Boundaries, Find Peace by Nedra Glover Twab. And I'll just note, I've read the middle one. I've read Boundaries by Cloud and Townsend. I've read The Body Keeps the Score. I've seen the other book. I haven't read it yet. I think I actually have it. At least I had it at one time through Libby. But I didn't mind The Body Keeps the Score, but you have feelings about it. And I wanted the audience to know, because this is the book that everybody talks about. And so I wanted to at least give you a chance to say what you want to say about that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm laughing at something internally. I'm not going to even say what it is. But yes. So here's my thought on The Body Keeps the Score. I happen to think as a trauma recovery coach, that it is an incredibly triggering and mildly traumatizing book. So if you are a highly sensitive person, you can skip that book. It's not going to do you that much good. I would say that the best book on trauma, from a whole perspective, is the book by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey called What Happened to You.
I was going to mention that. That's
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah.
It's my favorite book. It's what I actually invite my clients to read. It's softer. There's still a couple of stories in there that are a little hard to hear, but nothing like The Body Keeps the Score. I don't know what the hell Bessel van der Kolk was thinking, but that's a really intense one. And there are just a lot of other books that might be gentler. But just, we're talking about boundaries here. So these books on boundaries, I'm sure, are going to be fantastic, even though I haven't read them.
Yeah. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey, What Happened to You, I think is an incredible book to both sense what the abuser, how they push through the walls, how the victim is hurt, how sensitive we ought to be for self-compassionate for ourselves, and how sensitive we ought to be for the things that other people go through.
Yeah.
And rather than go, why did you do that? To go, what happened to you? In this space where you and I are coaches, we're having conversations all the time around healthy and unhealthy mechanisms in relationships and in systems. I can see how it's going to be useful over and over and over again to work with the client, work with the person on the level of like, help me understand what happened to you so that I can get why you show up this way. And then I want to get you to pay attention to what it feels like as you show up this way, and see if we can create some pauses where you can begin to respond differently. I think that book is a must read. What Happened to You? So I'm so glad you mentioned it. What Happened to You by Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey. Number 9 here, Allow Yourself to Change Your Mind. John Kerry once got in trouble. Maybe it even cost him an election, but he said a thing where he said, I was for it before I was against it.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody criticized, in the political realm, he was highly criticized for caving in. And as I've gotten older, yes, there are moments where politicians do what's convenient to get votes. I'm not talking about those moments. What I'm suggesting is that we ought to have room for our politicians to change.
Yeah.
They ought to be allowed to become informed and to change their position. And as I've gotten older, I realized that being willing to admit you were wrong, being willing to be curious and gain new information, being willing to change your mind is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength.
Yeah.
Any thoughts from you?
I just agree. Which one are we on right now?
Number 9, Allow Yourself to Change Your Mind.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I was thinking about number 10.
Yeah, and I'll get your thoughts on that one too. But safe boundaries are flexible, not rigid. It's okay to say yes once and no later. Just like you did with the pet sitting in the house sitting. You're like, all right, I'll do this once. And then you're like, this isn't for me. This isn't good for me. I thought I was okay with this, but I realized I'm not. And then number 10 here, working with a trauma-informed guide. Do you want to say anything about this? I'll let you read
Yeah.
those if you want to, or just talk about this.
So, a therapist or coach can help role play boundary setting. You can explore your somatic responses, especially if you work with a somatic experiencing practitioner. And then you can build strategies for difficult relationships. And it says here sometimes survivors need someone to say, yes, that line you're drawing is legitimate. And that is where therapy can be so great. And I, again, utilized a therapist in this way to help me, work through past things that had happened where I had internalized like so much blame, self-blame about, how I'd responded because the other person reacted so badly in certain situations. And I'm like, well, was it okay for me to say the thing I needed or to set that boundary or whatever? Because in my life, and I have a lot of have had a lot of people in my extended life. We'll just say I'm not going to say what relationships that have not responded well to boundaries because boundaries just weren't okay. And so sometimes I can internalize if somebody had like a really big explosion to a boundary that I set. What was it me? Was it something wrong with me? And having a therapist or another practitioner be able to reflect back, like, no, that was actually a healthy thing that you did, helps rewire your brain so you understand that it's not you, and that, again, it really is safe and okay and healthy to have boundaries and to have legitimate needs. So that's what I'll say on that because, yeah, and sometimes we just can't get to that ourselves. So it's really helpful to have that reflection.
Yeah, and it does say there in 10, and I think this is so useful, but when you sit down with someone you trust, someone who is safe, and I think coaches and therapists, this is a role that they are really supposed to fill. And it isn't perfect. I mean, there are unhealthy therapists out there. There are
Mhm.
unhealthy coaches out there. You pointed that just in some of your comments a few minutes ago. But we all need places to work out what's reasonable sometimes, because we do sometimes get it wrong. We either expect too much out of someone else, or we think that we're not that we're allowed something, and maybe we're not. I'll just say that for the most part, I think a coach or a therapist is a beautiful place to go, hey, let me bounce this idea off you. Here's the situation. Here's what I'm feeling. Here's what I'm thinking. Here's how I want to respond to this. Does that seem reasonable? And to get somebody who has no investment uh, in your life, other than to be a guide or to be a safe space to bounce things off of. Anyway, I think that can be really useful. Okay. Let me take that back off, put this one back up. If your boundaries are too open, you may end up hurt by others. Uh, Ways that this can express itself: sharing too much personal information about yourself with acquaintances or strangers, taking responsibility for others' feelings, believing everything you hear, always doing what others say, never disagreeing or saying no, doing anything to avoid conflict, displaying inappropriate affection, sitting or standing too close to another. I had a Spanish teacher, and I don't know what it is about some people, but like for them, the
Close
comfort zone,
talkers.
yeah, the comfort zone is like 6 inches from your face.
Yeah.
There have been so many times in my life where somebody came into what I joke with my kids and call the purple circle. My kids had a my kids had 2 programs that taught them boundaries when it came to their bodies. One of them was a song that said something like, "Don't go, don't go there, stay away from my no square," some song like that. And then the other one was about staying outside of my purple circle.
Mhm.
And it talked about how we all have layers of uh, comfort in terms of personal connection. And so maybe if we have good, safe, loving parents, good, safe, loving siblings, we let them get so close to us without us feeling awkward. And you can do this experiment. I think this is a cool thing to do with children, is to help them understand that at what degree of people getting closer and closer to you, where do you start to feel uncomfortable? And teach your kids that it's really okay to feel that. And so the closest circle was like your purple circle, and outside of that was like the yellow circle, and outside of that was a different. And so strangers could get so close, family could get closer, but at some point, all of us intuitively go, "That's too close."
Yeah.
And I can name 100 times in my life where somebody came right up to me, got past that circle, wherever that was, that it's arbitrary in terms of it's not visible, but it's not arbitrary. It's a real line. And when someone got closer, I would always just take a step back
Yeah.
because I don't have to have you be in my space that close. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah, this happens a lot, and I think also you have to teach your kids not only about, like, where their boundaries are, but how to respect where somebody else's boundary is, because it does feel really uncomfortable when somebody's too close to your bubble, and I may come across as potentially cold because I'd rather err on the side of caution than invade somebody's personal space. I don't like that feeling. I've had that happen a lot. Um, and also just like oversharing, like people who assume a level of intimacy and trust that hasn't been established. So really learning to clue into recognizing that you don't necessarily share certain personal things unless you've established trust over a period of time, like a consistent level of trust over a period of time. Because sometimes just offering up TMI to people can feel uncomfortable, and I think it's a person's attempt to sort of create intimacy. This is another byproduct of codependency, is there can be something called enmeshment, where we want to get too close to people, or we're, because that's what makes us feel safe, or that's what we've known as love or safety or connection. And for a lot of people, that doesn't feel safe or okay. So, yeah, there's a way to recognize when your boundaries are too open and you maybe invade other people's boundaries. And you got to get clear with yourself. And that's again part of what, when you start to identify your somatic or physical boundaries, and you learn how to stay safe in your bubble and how to cope with your own feelings of discomfort, you start to get better, more accurate information about everybody else too. And you start to respect other people's boundaries in a better way. I'm trying to think, I'm sure there were things that I did that were violations of other people's boundaries, and maybe I still do. I don't know. We're always learning new things. Um, but because I came from, again, a family system, a cultural system where some of these things weren't respected or I didn't know, I had to relearn, how to respect other people's boundaries. So even sometimes the questions you might ask somebody, sometimes you might ask a question that's too personal for somebody, and they might feel that that's not safe, or it's not safe to say no to that. So
the TMI one, I think I have a little bit of trouble with it because I realize that the religious system I came out of shamed people for vulnerability, and it made vulnerability bad. That what's safe is to wear the mask, pretend to be, play the part, pretend the thing. And so coming out of it and wanting to be helpful to people, I often will step into vulnerability
mhm.
and be open about things that in the system we would never have thought about saying or being
Yep.
or acknowledging. And there's a fine line between trying to help a wounded community move towards vulnerability and TMI.
Yes.
And I sometimes think I've struggled with figuring out exactly where that line is, because I
Yeah.
definitely want to model vulnerability. I want
Mhm.
people to see, like, oh, he's trying to show that this is a safe space where I can be me and I don't have to pretend, and I'm going to be validated for who I am, and I don't have to wear the mask here.
Yeah.
Um, that can quickly turn into people feeling like this is a safe place to say anything and everything.
Yeah. Yeah, and I even, like, there are times that I will share from that vulnerable place or a personal place, even in session with a client, but the intent is always to match the client's vulnerability, or to create a space for them to feel less shamed or not feel so alone in maybe something that they have shared. Um, and yeah, it is a fine line, and And it takes a while. I remember Brene Brown shared something along the lines of, because she's so big on vulnerability and shame and all this stuff. And she said that, you should really, like, not everybody deserves your sacred story. Not everybody deserves your vulnerability. And so you need to make sure that the people that you are sharing vulnerability with are capable of handling it with respect. And so there has to be some level of trust. And all situations are different,
Mhm.
but yeah, that's something I think that it's not always easy to navigate. But if your intention is to create safety or open a space for people to feel less shame or to be able to match that vulnerability, I think that's a noble intention. Sometimes it works really well, sometimes it doesn't. So just depends.
I'll just say the last two here. If boundaries are too open, it can lead to moments where someone is saying or doing something sexually suggestive
Mm.
uh, in front of others, including jokes, noises, comments. Sometimes we try to make people feel uncomfortable, and unhealthy people will use those kinds of things to see they can uh, who they can knock the walls down of, and then get in and cause abuse. And so just be aware of who the people are that are constantly testing boundaries, constantly testing who will speak up, who will say no, who will stop this from going on. And often it seems like it's happening in innocent, or like, hey, that was uncomfortable, but it wasn't the biggest deal. But often abusers start off with the smaller breaking down of boundaries rather than trying to immediately go into big egregious step over the line kind of things. So anyway, and then also being tricked into being abused and not seeking help. Um,
Yeah.
Often abusers will make it your fault and manipulate you into not speaking out. They create a boundary where they get to violate you and you don't get to report it. And you in some way agree to that boundary rather than feeling safe to speak your voice and tell your story.
And also a thing that's important to note is that when there are substances or alcohol that's being used in a group, that can really dissolve people's boundaries. And so sometimes you have to be really careful and aware of that, because that puts you at greater risk of either being violated or potentially violating another person, because your awareness of boundaries kind of dissolves with some of those substances.
Okay, I want to say something here. Can we just let's go off in the weeds for just a moment?
Oh, that'll be fun.
Yeah. Uh, Let me put this one up.
Yeah.
So we have an accepted thing in our culture. So I agree with you, by the way. There are situations where rape or sexual abuse have occurred because one or both parties were under the influence of alcohol or drugs, and the person would have never done the thing, but now they're doing the thing, but in ways that were not consensual. And sometimes there's a degree of non-intention on the part of the abuser because they're under the influence too, and they're going with the flow of whatever, and it's in their mind they're not doing something wrong. In other instances, they're clearly doing something wrong, and I don't think there's gray area with abuse, but I think there's gray area with people under the influence understanding exactly what's going on in a situation. But we also have this accepted thing in our culture where if you and I are going to go on a date, we order some drinks to loosen us up. And so I find it strange that on one hand, we mutually agree that we're going to take substances that loosen us up. And then on the back end, one of us could be charged with a crime solely because we took substances that loosened us up.
Mhm. Which is, again, why I say that, like, I think that we are actually, as a culture, um, we don't respect the substances that are normalized in our culture enough, because we don't think through how it impacts us, and what level of vulnerability it invites us into. And So I just think that stuff should be considered more. But I think we're also hungry for connection. We're hungry for community, and those of us who have grown up and don't quite feel safe in social situations. I don't know how many people it's so many people tend to have some social anxiety. So they reach for those substances to kind of feel easier about being social and in connection. Cause again, it's something we desperately want and need, but it comes with risks. And, we could get into this some other time. We were talking about as we were creating sort of a safe container for the group that we're going to be doing. We talked about like different rules, and in my support groups, I read a meeting statement that clearly dictates and goes over the boundaries and the rules and the things that we need to be thinking about as we share that space. And I know that's not going to be a fun thing to do at a party, but it might be something that would be helpful if we got to the point that we made a clear statement about what it is we're doing in a group together with other people, and to be remind each other of like, these are the rules. This is how we want to show up in this shared space, and this is how we want to be mindful of, we're all engaging in or utilizing these substances that are going to alter our states. And even as we do that, let's make sure that we're all aware of how we want to show up. And if we see somebody else violating a boundary, let's speak up about it. There are ways I think we can make that more safe. So
Yeah, I'll just go back and say I'm not entirely comfortable with a world where if everything playing out appears to be consensual, no one's intentionally abusing another person. They perceive that the person they've gone out with for the night is consenting. And that person later on says, I couldn't have consented. I was under the influence.
mhm.
And the law in certain situations will agree with them that because they had alcohol, because they had a drug, they were unable to consent.
Mhm.
When that person on the front end says, I'd like to take something so that I can get some social lubrication and I can let some of my walls down because I do want to connect. There's a double standard there. Again, I'm always going to side with the person who's abused, but I would just note that we create situations that are intentionally designed to have drugs or alcohol, with both sides knowing that maybe this goes somewhere,
Mhm.
only to have regrets on the back end. And the legality of that hinges on the fact that there were drugs and alcohol.
Yeah, and maybe it gets to the point that we have people sign a waiver if they are gonna be taking drugs and alcohol. You know what I mean? Like, to the point that you are recognizing what, that you are stepping and putting yourself into a vulnerable situation if you choose to exceed a certain amount of it, right? Like, if you are going to do that because you wanna feel more relaxed, that's one thing, but if you get to the point where you're completely blacking out and you have n no agency over your body, that's that on some level, that's on you, and I don't mean that in a way to, like, shame or blame a victim. It is never okay. I wouldn't care how drunk or passed out another person is. It would never, ever be okay for somebody to violate that person's body or do something that's beyond that person's consent. That person cannot consent. But at the same time, there needs to be more conversation around, the choices people make, and encouraging people to be mindful of, please don't put yourself in that situation if you can help it. Or if you do, make sure it's really with people who are very trustworthy. Um, so I don't know. I might get some flack for saying that, but yeah,
The and then also too, there's a YouTube video out there on consent, and it uses tea as the medium instead of sex. And
yeah,
so if someone comes to your house and you go, "Hey, would you like some tea?" And they go, "Yes, I'd love some tea." And you go make the tea. You go through all the trouble to heat up the water and to steep the tea bag into the cup. And now you bring the tea back and they're unconscious. You don't just pour tea down their mouth. That
no,
that makes no sense. And so I think when it comes to, if we just set sex aside and think of it with something more simple, we can clearly delineate when is it right, when is it wrong. I can go through all the trouble to make someone tea, and they change their mind at the last moment and go, on second thought, I don't really want any tea. And I can be so disappointed for all the trouble I went through
Yeah.
to make the tea, but I still don't have a right to force the tea on anyone.
No,
Yeah.
never. And even if somebody, for example, so if you've chosen to take a substance that's changed your ability to consent, uh, and then you are engaging with another person who's taken a substance that has clouded their ability to perceive consent or to make rational good judgments, then again, you're at more risk because, and again, that doesn't absolve that person from violating your boundaries ever. It never ever absolves
Right.
that other person. But you have to recognize the risk in doing that. And people just need to be more aware and conscientious of that and protect themselves. Because just in general, that's a bad recipe. Like it's a recipe for bad things to happen. So
Yep, 100%. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this and we'll finish up here. So this setting and maintaining boundaries, we've talked about these enough. Say no as needed. Make your safety come first. Set clear rules. Get emotional support if needed through therapy, coaching, support groups. Ground yourself around positivity. And I don't, that last one, I gave this pause when I saw this. I definitely want to surround myself with healthy people, safe people. But
positivity.
I think an overabundance of positivity can sometimes be the worst thing in the world,
Yeah,
because it distorts reality, which is not helpful. Uh,
agreed. I had the
so
same thought about that, by the way.
yeah, good. Uh, then 10 reminders for safe boundaries. Your body is yours. Anybody deems that you should give up autonomy of your body, recognize your body is yours. You always have ownership of your body. Needs are not sins. No is a complete sentence. Mutuality matters. We talked about that earlier when we said reciprocity. Discomfort is normal at first. I didn't know all of this when I was a kid. As an adult on this side of life, I've had to learn at times where discomfort is just me afraid to try a thing that actually would be beneficial for me to learn and grow. And discomfort can also be an intuitive sign that something's unsafe.
Mhm.
And figuring out the difference, I think part of that is just being a human being and experiencing life and learning it. But I also think that we can help younger people shortcut the process by helping model for them and helping explain to them in ways that they can learn how to tell the difference through our experiences. Um, Question the shoulds. We talked about that earlier. Find boundary safe people. Change is allowed. We talked about changing your mind is allowed. Self-trust is sacred. Boundaries are love. Boundaries are how you love yourself. Boundaries are how you respect and love others.
And boundaries are what give you an actual sense of felt safety. Can I say one more thing back to our conversation about the weeds? The other thing I want to say about that is that because I was saying, like, when people are choosing to take substances that are mind altering, um, I want to address the other side of it. So if you are somebody who is choosing to take a substance because you want to feel more relaxed, you need to recognize that that puts you in a vulnerable situation. But on the other side, if you are someone who is taking a substance to feel more relaxed, you have to recognize that that sometimes affects your ability to make good choices and to respect another person's boundaries. So if you are with another person who is drinking or taking some type of substance, it might behoove you to not drink or take a substance so that you know that you will stay clear the whole way through and not unintentionally violate that person's boundaries or have a fogginess about being able to read and respect another person's boundaries. So I want to add that as well because I'm not just trying to victim blame or be like, well, if you don't want to be violated, you should really be responsible for yourself. Also, hey, if you don't want to violate, you should be healthy and responsible for yourself. So I want to make sure I'm talking about that from both sides.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, I appreciate that. All right, this is let's go back here to I think we were already done with all of those. So
Yep.
this quote here, I thought this was a good quote. We can't take part in therapy if we feel unsafe. Boundaries make us feel safe. Boundaries are what therapy is about. And I was thinking about the kinds of situations you're in with a client. You often say, like, my job is to normalize their life experience, that they weren't wrong, that they weren't an anomaly, that the things that happened to them as a human are similar in some way to all the things that happen to all the other kinds of humans out there. But to validate that what they experienced was real and what it did to them was real and how it affects them is real. And I think in doing so in a really healthy way, you're modeling in some way, you're modeling boundaries. You're helping them to see what a safe space looks like, where the lines are when they're clearly delineated. As you laid out the rules for this support group that we're about to start on the 21st, when I read those rules, I was so impressed with what you came up with, because you explain to the class, you articulate to the support group very clearly what a healthy way is that this group is going to be expected to interact with each other, and how you and I as coaches are going to interact with the folks in it. And it's spelled out so in such a healthy way and so clearly that the entire group, and you and I included, understand what the boundaries of this support group are. And I'll just note that healthy therapy, healthy coaching, your coach, your therapist should absolutely model healthy boundaries so that you understand the structure of that space. Understanding the structure of a space is part of what creates the safety in it.
Yeah, and you're giving me an idea because, well, I was gonna say, yeah, it helps. It's a container of safety, and it might even be a good idea. Maybe I should create something to give to individual clients that I work with, right? Like
Mm,
a thing of the do's and don'ts. This is what the space is for. This is where, I don't know, something that sort of illustrates that, and that again supports an understanding of what to expect and and gives more safety for the process.
yeah, 100%. And then I don't want to spend going through these, but I just want to note healthy and unhealthy boundaries. And I'll just read a few of these. So, healthy boundaries: not allowing someone to take advantage of your generosity,
Mm.
caring for yourself with a healthy interdependence, asking a person before touching them, um, develop appropriate trust over time. You pointed to Brene Brown and uh, her point of not sharing your sacred story with anyone and everyone, but to learn who you can trust with it, that you develop it incrementally over time. And so there's a indication of it here on this list as well. Unhealthy boundaries. And again, you can pause this and you can read all of those. Unhealthy boundaries: accepting gifts, touch, sex that you do not want, allowing someone to take as much as they want from you. Black and white thinking, by the way, is on that list. Being overwhelmed by a person or not allowing self to be influenced. Touching a person, um, that might seem like a strange one, by the way, but not being open to so you and I are in a relationship. If I'm always picking the restaurant because I'm not allowing you to influence me, that's an unhealthy boundary.
Mhm.
So there's also an unhealthy side of that coin, which is that you overly allow yourself to be influenced by things and people that you would be better off healthier for not being influenced.
Yeah.
But it does work the other way, that if you're always having your walls up and never respecting that other people have a right to influence an environment as well, or to get their needs met, that's not a healthy boundary either.
No, and sometimes it requires you to check in with other people to really give choice and voice and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah. A couple of others, expecting others to automatically meet your needs, trusting everyone, trusting no one, um, being sexual for your partner, not yourself, or the inability to care about your partner's sexual needs. So those are the two extremes, and both of those are unhealthy boundaries. Talking at intimate levels at first meeting. We already talked about that, but you can pause that. You can read that. If you notice there's a lot of your behaviors or a lot of behaviors of those that you are in relationship with or systems that you participate in that have a lot of those on the right-hand side, you might want to consider that either you or the people or systems around you have deeply unhealthy boundaries. I wanted to finish up, Teresa, just reminding people of the work that you and I are doing away from the podcast. Do you want to say anything here about the coaching in the group that we're doing, which will be on the next page?
yeah. So, as some of you may know this already, but Bill has received his certification as a somatic trauma informed coach. And I have done coaching for a while. And so Bill and I are sort of collaborating because we've been talking about this for a long time, how to sort of create a healthy supportive space for people in the post-Mormon space or people who have come out of unhealthy high demand systems or even just unhealthy cultural systems. And so we have created a support group, but we also are offering support for one-on-one individual coaching. So Bill is more geared towards people that are moving through religious deconstruction, and as well as just general trauma stuff. And I specialize in working with people who are experiencing the physical manifestation of trauma from any form of trauma. And then together we've come to create this support group for religious deconstruction and religious trauma. And that's going to be starting on October 21st. We're going to do it as a monthly subscription. So it's going to be $60 a month. And then we're going to have group meetings every other Tuesday. So it'll be Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Mountain Time starting October 21st. And the meetings are going to be 90 minutes. And we're going to cap the groups at 15. Right now, we're a little bit more than halfway full for our first group. And if we get more interest than that, we're going to open up a second one. But for now, we've just got the one that'll be on Tuesdays, and we're really excited about it. Again, it's going to be a group that has a really safe container, so people can feel safe being able to share their sacred story. And we're going to really create a lot of healthy boundaries around how people share their sacred story and how we respond to others sharing their stories. And we'll also offer some different tools and different support. But for the most part, it's really going to be a place for people to feel a sense of community, for them to move through the different phases that they're going through deconstruction. And we'll share the different phases of the process of deconstruction. So there's a lot that's going to be there. It's going to be really cool. We're excited about it. And if anyone's interested in that, you can go to some links that we will put in the show notes. And yeah, and if anyone's interested in, again, trauma-informed coaching, you can go to awakenandthrive.org, where you can see where you can connect with Bill or with myself.
Yep. So for $60 a month, far below the cost to meet with a coach or with a therapist one-on-one, you get the opportunity to sit down with us in a community of fellow travelers twice a month, every other Tuesday, twice a month, $60 a month. And again, the links for that will be in the show notes. I might even have something sort of come up on the screen right now. So maybe you're seeing that on the screen already, just to denote that as well. But that is happening. And we would love to, if you think that would be helpful, we'd love to see you there. So please register as we do have limited availability for that at the moment for that first group. And then just to note the things that we're specializing in, the things I've been trained in, the things you've been trained in, and where our life experiences help mold that. Anxiety, chronic fatigue, religious, spiritual trauma, two of the things that you deal with specifically, safe and sound protocol, which for folks who don't know, and you can say whatever, it's your thing, but I like describing because it's so interesting. It's using certain kinds of music or sound in order to help the body regulate and process what you're feeling. What more would you want to say about that? Because I think it's a unique kind of
It
assistance.
is. It is. It's a tool. So anyone who's familiar with polyvagal theory, this Safe and Sound protocol was developed by Dr. Stephen Porges, who created the polyvagal theory. So this is a nervous system based intervention that helps retrain your system to pick up more cues of safety from the environment and from one person to another. So it's a thing that can be used for people who have difficulty in relationships, social anxiety, anxiety in general, sometimes for depression. And it's a very interesting intervention that is different. Everyone responds to it differently, but it's helped a lot of people come out of deep states of protection in their nervous systems. And when I say protection, I mean, like fight or flight, being in hypervigilance all the time, or being in a state of shutdown where they're, they have a hard time feeling interested in things, or a freeze state, which is a combination of sympathetic and shutdown, which is just that braced feeling of like, oh my gosh, I need to go and do things, but I can't. I feel so shut down. So it can be really supportive for those things. And it's something that I do alongside coaching to help support people.
Yeah, and then the other one, I love the way they've worded this, but pain reprocessing, that's another thing that you have a specialty in, reframing chronic pain through neuroscience informed strategies that reduce fear and promote relief. So if somebody out there, if you're dealing with something that's plagued you, you deal with it on the daily, and you've been to doctors, you've been to places, and nobody can quite figure out what it is or address it. I'm going to suggest that maybe give Teresa an opportunity to sit down with you. And if you go to awakenandthrive.org, and in there you can click to go to the support group. You can click for one-on-one coaching, and then you can read what Teresa's specialties are, what she specializes in, what I specialize in, and you can pick one of us. And then we also just do general coaching or general trauma coaching as well. And I'm really excited to begin this new phase of life and this new opportunity to serve this community. And I've really appreciated you modeling a lot of this for me as I've gotten the education and the certification to do it. And I'm really excited to see where we go from here. So folks, that is our conversation on boundaries, and hopefully we'll see some of you in the support group. If you have any questions for us, please leave your comments down below. We do respond to those. And please hit the like button. Please subscribe to the channel. And the Almost Awakened podcast does survive on donations. In the show notes is the donation link for the podcast as well. If you like these conversations, if you like to hear Teresa and I talking about how to be a happier, healthier human on the second half of life, please go to almostawakened.org, click the donate button, send $5 or $10 a month. Something small is great. And we'll keep bringing you great content to give you resources and tools for being a more awakened, better, healthier, more responsive human being. Anything else from you, Teresa?
Nope. I feel really grateful that we get to have these conversations. I think I learn and grow as we communicate this stuff. Because again, you and I are in this process along with everybody else. We're still trying to figure out how to be the best human we can be. And move through our own challenges and in a process that we then want to help share with other people.
Yeah. So folks, let curiosity get the best of you. I think that really is what Almost Awakened means, is to be curious and to keep learning and keep trying to figure out how to be better at this thing called being human. All right. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you, Teresa. And we'll see all of you guys soon. Bye-bye.
Thanks for tuning in to the Almost Awakened podcast. For more tools, resources, and real talk about conscious living, visit almostawakened.org. That's almostawakened.org, your resource for waking up